Today I will share with you a story that begins with a funeral, a cruel laugh, and a silence that changed everything. At the will reading, my son smirked at the lawyer, "She's half dead already." He thought the fortune was his until the will was read. Silence followed. That moment happened before my very eyes. It was real, and it pierced deeper than any blade. If you want to follow more stories like this one, stories of dignity, family, and justice that we call grandma life stories, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your support means the world, and it keeps these stories alive. My name is Wendy. I am 73 years old, a mother and a grandmother. My hair, once auburn, has turned silver, and my hands carry the map of time. They say age makes a woman invisible, but at this funeral, my very existence was mocked as if I were already gone, nothing more than a shadow taking up space. The air in Sacramento was heavy that morning. A soft gray sky hung low over the city, and the streets seemed quieter than usual. Inside the chapel, lilies lined the aisle, filling the space with their sharp fragrance. Pine wood coffins always carry a kind of raw honesty, and today, the scent of polished timber mixed with the whispers of old hymns. People bowed their heads, some in genuine grief, others calculating what would come next. Gregory, my eldest son, was the loudest in silence. His eyes were red, not from mourning, but from exhaustion. The black suit he wore was creased as if he had slept in it. And perhaps he had between phone calls to creditors and private meetings I was never told about. In his hand, he clutched a leather notebook, its edges frayed pages filled with numbers that looked nothing like prayers. I sat 2 pews behind him, unnoticed, my back straight, my palms resting on the arms of the wooden chair. I thought of his childhood, the way he once ran to me, scraped knees and tear-stained face, whispering, "Mama, don't leave me." That boy was nowhere in the man before me. The pastor's voice was a low hum, chanting the closing words of Scripture. Then, in the stillness that followed, Gregory leaned to the side, smirk tugging at his lips. His voice was sharp, meant to wound, and every syllable struck like iron on bone. "She's half dead already. We should move her out and start fresh." My body stiffened. My hand tightened on the chair until my knuckles blanched. I heard a faint gasp from someone behind me, but no one spoke. The words hung in the air, cruel and heavy, as if they had been waiting for release all along. Gregory's smirk grew wider when he noticed my silence. He mistook my restraint for weakness, as he often did. He flipped open the notebook, and I caught the glimpse of bold ink, Sacramento House, Tahoe, Cabin Investments Vehicles. He had listed everything his father owned as though it were already his. I did not answer him. Not yet. My silence was not submission. It was the sharpening of a blade he could not see. Inside me, something shifted. His words were the first stone cast in a storm I had known would come. My son had laughed in my face at a funeral, his father's funeral, and had measured my worth not by the years I had lived, nor the sacrifices I had made, but by the inches of property and the numbers in a bank. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the hymn's echo settle over me like a veil. If grief had weight, I carried 2 burdens that day, the loss of my husband and the betrayal of my son, but I stayed still silent, my lips pressed together. Let him speak, I thought. Let him show everyone who he has become. The chapel emptied slowly after the service. Guests gave quick hugs, mumbled condolences, and eyed the exit more than they eyed me. The lilies on the altar seemed almost mocking in their whiteness, as if purity could bloom among such greed. Gregory did not look at me as he walked past. Instead, he tapped his notebook against his palm lips, curled in that same cruel half-smile. To anyone else, it might have seemed like nervous energy. To me, it was a declaration. He believed the fortune was already his. He believed I was nothing but an obstacle, a formality. He believed the lawyer's words would confirm what he had already written in that notebook. And so the first cut was made. The laugh that told the world I was disposable. The smirk that said a son no longer saw his mother, but only the walls, the land, the money she lived upon. What Gregory did not realize was that silence is not emptiness. Silence can be a weapon. And while he thought he was carving the future for himself, I was sharpening the truth that would undo him. The funeral ended. The real reckoning had yet to begin. The days after the funeral moved like shadows across the walls. Silence had settled into the house, but it was not peace. It was the quiet of vultures circling. I woke each morning to the same view of our Sacramento garden, once full of roses, now neglected petals scattered by the late summer wind. The roses had witnessed everything: our anniversaries, our children's birthdays, the laughter of neighbors. Now they stood like mourners themselves. On the third morning, Gregory arrived with Clara. They did not knock. They simply pushed the door open as if the house were already theirs. I stood by the kitchen counter, my cup of tea cooling in my hand, as they walked in with boxes, rolls of tape, and sticky notes in loud neon colors. Clara's heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Her eyes scanned the room with precision like a buyer at an auction. Gregory carried a small suitcase, but it wasn't for clothes. When he unzipped it, the polished necks of bottles gleamed. His father's rare whiskey collection. "Perfect," he muttered. "These can go straight to the market. No point letting them gather dust." Clara didn't smile, but her voice was cold enough to chill the room. "Start with the big pieces. The oak cabinet, the leather chairs. Mark them. Movers will need to know what's spoken for." Gregory pulled a roll of tape from his pocket and slapped a strip across the glass cabinet that had stood in our family room for 40 years. "Mine," he said simply, as though he had built it with his own hands. I tightened my grip on the teacup. I wanted to speak, but my throat stayed closed. My silence was a shield. They moved from room to room, the sound of tape ripping, echoing through the halls. Clara pointed at the leather chair where my husband used to sit every evening. Gregory pressed another label onto it. "This one's ours too," she said flatly. When they entered my bedroom, the air changed. Gregory's eyes flicked to the top drawer of my dresser. He pulled it open without asking. Inside lay my wedding ring, a simple gold band I had worn for decades until it grew too loose for my fingers. He lifted it with 2 fingers and dangled it in front of Clara. "See? She doesn't need this anymore," he said. "Better it stays with us." Clara gave a small nod, not even looking at me. "Keep going, don't waste time." I felt my pulse in my ears. That ring had survived the birth of 3 children, the sickness of winters, the joy of anniversaries, the warmth of his hand holding mine. Now it hung in Gregory's grip like a pawn ticket. Sophie appeared in the doorway then, my granddaughter, 15 years old, her dark hair falling over her shoulders. Her eyes flickered between her parents and me, and then she looked down, unable to speak. She stood there only a moment before turning away, her face pale with quiet pain. Gregory, oblivious, crouched beside the suitcase again and placed the ring next to the whiskey bottles. His voice dripped with impatience. "Clara checked the closet. There's probably jewelry she forgot about." Clara pushed hangers aside, her lips pressed tight. "This won't take long. She doesn't wear half of these things. Better to put them to use." I leaned against the dresser, fingers curling against the wood. In that moment, I remembered Sophie's soft voice at the funeral when she whispered to me, "Grandma, don't sign anything, please." Her words returned now like a lifeline. She had seen through them long before I allowed myself to, but still I said nothing. Gregory moved next to the mantel where a photograph of my husband and me on our wedding day had sat for decades. He ripped a piece of tape and pressed it across the glass. "Even this should be claimed," he said, smirking. "Good memory for me, maybe not for her." The sound of tape against glass felt like a knife. For a second, I thought I might crumble. Then I remembered my silence was not weakness. It was calculation. Each label he placed was a mark against him, each theft a seed of his own undoing. Clara's voice cut through. "Greg, hurry. Movers will be here by the weekend. Let's finish the dining set next." They marched toward the dining room, neon notes fluttering on wood and leather like wounds. Sophie lingered in the hallway, her face pale. She glanced at me again, her eyes full of questions she dared not ask out loud. I gave her a small nod. It was enough. She understood that I was not defeated. From the dining room, I heard Gregory laugh, the sound of labels tearing the scraping of chairs across the floor. "This will look good in our place. She doesn't even use it anymore." I set my teacup down gently, my hands steady despite the storm inside. They thought they were building a future for themselves. In truth, they were stacking evidence piece by piece for the reckoning to come. I walked into the hallway, the scent of lilies from the funeral still clinging to the air. My house was becoming a battlefield, and every label was a line drawn. I did not stop them. I watched. I memorized. For now, silence was my sword. The day would come when their laughter would falter, when their labels would mean nothing, when the will and the law would speak louder than any strip of tape. That day was not far away. That evening, the house felt smaller than ever. The air clung to my skin like damp cloth, thick with tension, thicker than the smoke from the single candle Clara had lit at the dining table. I sat at the head as I always had, though it felt less like a seat of honor now and more like the last island I had left. The plates clinked as Clara set them down, roast chicken, potatoes, beans, but there was no warmth in the gesture. Gregory was already in his seat. Before she finished his tie, loosened his hair, slicked back with the same arrogance I had seen at the funeral. Sophie slid into her chair quietly, her fork resting still on the tablecloth, as if even the silverware feared to move. Gregory filled his plate with greedy hands. Between mouthfuls, his voice carried across the table. "Tomorrow, when the will is read, I'll be sitting right at the front, the first chair. That's where I belong." The words hit the air like a gauntlet thrown. Clara nodded almost absently, her eyes fixed on her wine glass. Sophie lowered her gaze, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. I set my spoon down deliberately. The porcelain rang softly against the china, a sound sharper than any blade. My eyes met Gregory's. My voice was even calm, yet heavy enough to bend the silence. "Gregory, I said you can sit in any chair you like, but sitting in the front row does not change the truth." He froze mid-bite, then leaned back, a smirk pulling at his lips. "The truth, Mother, you've been confused lately. Everyone sees it. You're half lost already. The lawyer will read Father's words, and it will be clear to everyone who should take charge. I'm just preparing for reality." Clara's fork scraped the edge of her plate. She didn't argue, didn't soften his cruelty. She only pressed her napkin to her lips as if it were a mask. I kept my hands folded in my lap, steady. Inside, my heart pressed against my ribs. His words were meant to wound, but I let them pass over me. Wounds only matter if you let them fester. Sophie's eyes darted toward me. She had been silent through most of dinner, but now she studied me with a seriousness that belonged to someone far older than 15. She caught something Gregory missed. Perhaps it was the way my jaw tightened, or how my silence was no longer the silence of defeat, but of calculation. Gregory chuckled to himself and tore into another piece of chicken. Tomorrow everything will be settled. Finally. No more waiting. No more doubt. Clara and I can move forward. Clara glanced at him sharply. "Don't talk with your mouth full," she said softly, but there was no real scolding in her tone. More like habit. I reached for my water glass. The coolness steadied me. My voice returned with quiet strength. Moving forward requires more than tape and labels. It requires truth. Be careful, Gregory. Tomorrow will test more than you realize. His smirk deepened. He thought I was rambling, an old woman muttering in riddles. Truth, I already know the truth, Mother. Father built everything, and I'll carry it on. You'll see. I let my gaze linger on him just long enough for him to feel the weight of something he could not name. Then I turned back to my plate, the moment dismissed. That unsettled him more than any argument could. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across the walls. In those shifting shapes, I saw memories of dinners, past my husband's laughter, the children's squabbles, Sophie's baby giggles. Tonight, those ghosts pressed closer, watching, warning. Clara broke the silence next. We should keep tomorrow simple. No drama. Just the lawyer, the reading, and then we leave with what's ours. The words stung, though. She did not even look at me when she spoke them. Sophie flinched, her fork clattering softly against her plate. Gregory only nodded as if she were voicing his own thoughts. I rose, then my chair sliding back against the floor. My knees ached, but my spine held straight. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate. Dinner was enough for me tonight, I said, my tone cool but not brittle. I'll leave you to finish. Gregory waved a dismissive hand. Rest, Mother. Tomorrow is a big day. Sophie's eyes followed me as I moved toward the stairs. I paused only long enough to brush her shoulder gently with my hand. It was the smallest gesture, but in it, I placed everything I could not say aloud. Patience, strength, faith. She looked up at me and her lips pressed together as though she wanted to speak, but she did not. I left them in the dining room, their plates half empty, their laughter hollow. Upstairs, the house creaked under my steps, the old wood familiar beneath my feet. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence close around me again. But it was not suffocating silence now. It was the silence before a storm. I thought of Gregory's words, of the arrogance in his smile. He believed tomorrow would crown him. He believed I was already fading. He believed labels and sticky notes could rewrite history. But Sophie had seen me. She knew. The candle downstairs guttered in its glass. The house smelled faintly of roasted chicken and lilies left too long in their vases. I lay back against the pillows and closed my eyes. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember my husband's voice, low and steady, telling me once, long ago, patience is stronger than rage. I carried those words with me into the night. Tomorrow the truth would not hide. Tomorrow the chairs and their order would not matter. Tomorrow silence would break. And Gregory, my son, would finally learn that every empire built on greed eventually crumbles, starting with the first smirk. That night, after the dishes had been cleared and the house settled into uneasy quiet, I lingered in my room. Through the thin walls of this old home, whispers traveled further than people thought. My son and his wife had retreated to the guest bedroom they claimed whenever they visited, but their voices sharp, hurried, strained, slipped through the silence like knives sliding under a door. I sat by the window pretending to read, though the book lay closed on my lap. I let their words reach me. Gregory's voice came first low but restless. We can't wait for the will to be read. If Mother refuses to cooperate, we'll lose time, and time is money I don't have. Clara's tone was steadier, almost cold in its certainty. Then we make her sign before the reading. Some transfer documents, some permissions. If she resists, we remind her of her place. She's old, she's fragile. No one would question if we decided she needed professional care. My chest tightened, but I remained still. Gregory muttered, "You mean, threaten her with the nursing home?" Clara's answer was crisp. "Not a threat, a plan. If she refuses, we place her there. Then we'll have access to what we need anyway. But if she signs quietly, no one has to know." A pause stretched, broken by Gregory's uneven sigh. "Clara, you don't understand. It's not just about tomorrow. The calls don't stop. The creditors." His voice cracked, then dropped into a whisper that still carried. "They're circling me like vultures. I need money now." There was a faint clink of glass. Clara pouring herself more wine, I imagined. She exhaled slowly as if she were the only one in control. "Then you should be grateful I married you. You panic, Gregory. You always have. But I think 3 steps ahead. Your mother is sentimental. She won't fight if you press her the right way." And Sophie Gregory cut her off quickly. "Leave Sophie out of this." Her laugh was low, humorless. "Relax. I know the girl adores her grandmother, but she's just a child. She won't change anything." I heard the pacing of his footsteps, uneven, heavier than they had been when he was a boy racing through these halls. If she refuses Clara, what then? What if she embarrasses me tomorrow in front of the lawyer, in front of who? Clara snapped sharp as broken glass. You're so worried about appearances. This isn't about embarrassment. It's about survival. You'll push her. You'll remind her she owes you for all those years you pretended to care, and if she doesn't bend, then we'll make the decision for her. I heard a thud, maybe Gregory slamming his hand against the dresser. His voice dropped a tremor of desperation beneath the arrogance. I'm drowning, Clara. Every time my phone rings, I feel like it's the end. If we don't get this inheritance, I'm finished. Her reply was softer now, almost coaxing. That's why you must be strong. Don't show her your fear. Show her control. She's an old woman clinging to memories. She'll fold when she sees you're serious. I closed my eyes and drew a steady breath. My own son, pressed by debts I had never known, ready to strip away what little dignity I had left. And Clara, the woman he had chosen, saw me as a pawn, a signature on paper, a hurdle to be pushed aside. Still, I did not let despair take root. Their plotting only hardened the ground beneath my feet. Gregory's voice wavered again, and if she refuses even then, Clara's answer chilled me. Then we accelerate things. We remind her that the law allows guardianship when the elderly become difficult. One complaint to the right office, and she'll have no choice but to sign whatever we put in front of her. Do you understand? Silence fell for a moment. Then Gregory murmured, I understand. The bed springs creaked as if one of them sat down. Clara's tone softened, coaxing, persuasive. Tomorrow is ours if you keep steady. Do not let her see you shake. Smile, nod, but keep the papers ready. I'll handle the lawyer if needed. You only need to look like the rightful heir. I let their words etch themselves into me. Each sentence, each plan, each whisper of betrayal became a stone I stacked quietly in my mind. The wall was nearly built. From the hall, I caught the faint buzz of Gregory's phone vibrating. He muttered a curse under his breath. Another one. I can't keep stalling them, Clara. She answered without hesitation. Then stop stalling. Get results. Tomorrow, everything changes. Her voice had the edge of command, not suggestion. Gregory obeyed her even in private. He always had. I rose from my chair, my joints aching, but my resolve firm. Tomorrow would come, and they believed I would walk into their trap unaware. They believed my silence meant weakness. They believed they had already won. But what Gregory had forgotten, and what Clara had never known, was that silence can be sharper than shouting. And tomorrow at that table, when the lawyer opened the folder, my silence would turn into the blade they never saw coming. I returned to bed, letting the night wrap around me. Their plotting echoed faintly through the walls, but I no longer listened with dread. Instead, I memorized it like a map, each word guiding me closer to the moment where arrogance would meet consequence. The house had fallen quiet, but it was not the comforting quiet I once loved. It was the heavy silence of strained walls, where secrets pressed against the plaster and shadows carried the weight of words left unspoken. I had just settled onto my bed, a thin quilt pulled over my knees when I heard the lightest knock. At first I thought I imagined it, but then the door creaked open just an inch and a soft whisper slipped through. Grandma. I looked up. In the dim light, I saw Sophie's small figure hovering at the threshold. 17 years old, still so young, yet carrying a seriousness in her eyes that didn't belong to a child. She hesitated, as though afraid even the walls might betray her. Come in, sweetheart, I said gently. She closed the door behind her and tiptoed across the room. The old floorboards groaned faintly under her weight, and I could sense her nerves. She sat beside me, folding her hands tightly in her lap. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she leaned closer, so close I could feel her breath against my cheek, and whispered urgently, Grandma, don't sign anything, please. Her words startled me more than all of Gregory and Clara's plotting. I blinked, studying her. "What do you mean, darling?" I asked softly, though in my heart I already knew. She looked at me with wide, worried eyes. I overheard them, Dad and Mom. "They think you'll just agree. They're planning something with papers with the lawyer. They think you won't understand. But you do, don't you? You always do." I reached out and smoothed a strand of hair from her forehead, brushing it back with the gentleness only a grandmother's hand can carry. "Yes, Sophie, I do understand." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Promise me, Grandma. Promise me you won't let them trick you. They don't see you the way I do. They act like you're weak or confused, but you're not. You're the strongest person I know." Her voice cracked on those last words, and she pressed her lips together, fighting emotion. I felt the sting of tears rising in my own eyes, not from pain, but from the beauty of her loyalty. I cupped her cheek in my hand and whispered back, steady as stone. "Thank you, Sophie. I will never sign anything that isn't true. Not now, not ever." The relief in her face was instant, though her eyes still glistened. She leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder, like she had when she was a little girl seeking comfort after a bad dream. I stroked her hair, slow and deliberate, feeling the softness slip between my fingers. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was alive, filled with unspoken trust. After a while, she whispered again, her words trembling. "I don't understand why they're like this. Dad? He wasn't always so cruel. Was he?" I exhaled slowly. "No. Once he was a boy who laughed at silly things and cried when he scraped his knees, but life shapes people. Sophie, sometimes it shapes them poorly." She nodded against me, but I could feel her frustration simmering. "Mom pushes him. She always tells him what to do, but he still chooses it, doesn't he? He still chooses to hurt you." Her words cut sharper than she knew, but I did not flinch. "Yes," I said simply, "he chooses." Her fingers gripped mine tightly. "It isn't fair. You gave him everything, and now he—" She broke off, swallowing the lump in her throat. I squeezed her hand gently. "Fairness is rare in this world, child, but truth finds its way, always." We sat in quiet for a while, listening to the faint hum of the night outside, the crickets in the yard, the distant wind brushing the trees. Her breathing slowed as she calmed, but her grip on my hand did not loosen. At last she lifted her head and looked at me with eyes too old for her years. "Grandma, when they talk to you tomorrow, will you be ready?" A small smile touched my lips, though I kept my tone steady. "I will be more than ready. You don't have to worry." She frowned slightly. "But what if they try to scare you?" I brushed her hair back once more, this time tucking it neatly behind her ear. "Fear is only power if you allow it to be. I've lived long enough to know the difference between noise and truth, and I've learned the strength of silence." She studied me carefully, as though memorizing my face, and then whispered, almost in awe, "You're not afraid at all, are you?" I thought about her question. Fear had always been part of life, but in that moment, holding her hand, I realized that what anchored me wasn't fear, it was resolve. "No," I answered gently. "I am not afraid." Her shoulders eased, and a tiny smile appeared through her tears. She leaned forward, wrapping her arms around me tightly. I held her, feeling the fragile warmth of youth pressed against the weathered steadiness of age. This moment, this quiet exchange in the dark, was more powerful than any argument, more binding than any paper they could wave in my face. Sophie's whisper was not just a warning, it was light cutting through the shadows, reminding me that I was not alone. When she finally pulled back, I kissed her forehead. "Go rest, my dear. Tomorrow will come soon enough." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but remember, don't sign anything." Her whisper lingered even after she left, closing the door softly behind her. I sat in the quiet once again, but now it felt different. Not the heavy silence of betrayal, but the stillness of strength gathering. Sophie's words had struck deeper than Clara's threats or Gregory's desperation. They had lit something inside me, a flame that would not go out. That night, as I lay back and closed my eyes, I carried her whisper with me. It was more than advice. It was a promise I intended to keep. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray light that made everything seem colder than it was. My cardigan felt heavier on my shoulders as Sophie and I walked into Harold Lawson's law office. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, and the walnut-paneled walls seemed to absorb every sound. The room was arranged carefully, almost ceremoniously. A long table stretched across the center, its glossy surface reflecting the soft glow of brass lamps. The chairs were high-backed leather, arranged as though every seat carried judgment. On one end of the table sat Mr. Lawson himself, tall, silver-haired, his suit crisp, his expression carved into professional neutrality. Papers lay neatly stacked before him, a fountain pen resting across the top, like a blade waiting to be drawn. Gregory entered just ahead of us, his footsteps loud on the wood floor. He wore a tailored suit that looked borrowed more than owned, and he carried himself with the smugness of a man convinced victory was already in his pocket. He dropped into a chair, swung one leg over the other, and pulled a pen from his pocket. I watched as he scribbled his name over and over on the corner of a notepad, each flourish bolder than the last. "Practice makes perfect," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for everyone to hear. Clara followed heels, clicking sharply, her perfume filling the room with a sweetness that clashed against the solemn air. She was dressed immaculately, her makeup precise, her eyes shining with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. She sat close to Gregory, crossing her arms with a faint victorious smile. When her gaze fell on me, it was not the glance of a daughter-in-law, it was the cold appraisal of an opponent. I lowered myself into a chair at the far side of the table. My hands trembled slightly, but I folded them together on my lap, steadying them with willpower. The cardigan I wore, soft blue against the darker room, reminded me of mornings long past when peace still lived in this family. I clung to that memory as though it could guard me now. Sophie slipped into the seat just behind me, close enough that I could feel her presence like a shield. Her fingers fidgeted in her lap, her eyes darting nervously between faces, but when she looked at me, I saw determination flicker behind her worry. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Lawson's voice carried a calm authority. He adjusted his glasses, glancing down at the papers before him. "Yes," Clara said, briskly leaning forward. "We've waited long enough." Gregory chuckled, tapping his pen against the table. "Don't be so impatient, Clara. This is a historic moment. Mother finally putting things in order." I looked at him steadily. "Things are already in order, Gregory. It's only people who've made them messy." His smirk faltered, but only for a second. "We'll see about that," he muttered, returning to his notepad. Mr. Lawson cleared his throat, his eyes sweeping the table. "Today we are here to go over the contents of the late Mr. Callahan's estate and confirm the stipulations of his will. Before we proceed, I must remind everyone that this is a formal process. Please show respect for one another." Clara's lips curved into a half smile. "Of course, respect is very important." Her tone dripped with irony. I felt Sophie's hand brush against my shoulder from behind, a small gesture almost invisible, but it filled me with warmth. I breathed deeply, straightening in my chair. Gregory leaned forward suddenly, his elbows on the table. "Mr. Lawson, just so we're clear, since I'm the eldest son, I assume I'll be handling the main responsibilities moving forward. After all, tradition matters." Lawson regarded him with a polite, unreadable expression. "Tradition matters, yes, but legality matters more. We will review what Mr. Callahan himself outlined." Gregory's jaw tightened, though he forced another smile. Naturally. Clara reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it. Be patient, she whispered, though not softly enough that I couldn't hear. Her nails, sharp and painted red, dug into his skin. I shifted my gaze to the window where golden morning light filtered through heavy curtains. It struck me how deceptive it was, the sun shining outside, as though the world was calm and ordinary, while inside this room, battles were already being waged. Mr. Lawson adjusted the papers. We will begin by acknowledging the estate inventory. Household items, the property itself, financial accounts, and personal effects are all subject to division according to the will. Gregory snorted. Household items, we've already sorted through most of that. Labeled everything. Makes things easier for everyone. The audacity of his words tightened my chest, but I kept my voice steady. You sorted what wasn't yours to sort. That doesn't make it easier. It makes it theft. For a moment, silence fell. Gregory's pen stopped tapping. Clara's painted smile faltered. Mr. Lawson raised an eyebrow, but his voice remained calm. Mrs. Callahan is correct. Until matters are legally confirmed, no property should be considered claimed. Gregory shifted in his seat, pretending not to care, though his leg jiggled beneath the table. Clara shot him a sharp glance, silently urging composure. I folded my hands tighter in my lap. My palms were damp, but my resolve hardened with each word spoken. Sophie leaned closer to me, her whisper brushing the back of my neck. You're doing great, Grandma. I almost smiled. Almost. Mr. Lawson continued, his voice steady. We will proceed in order. Please remember, this is not about assumption. It is about truth, documented and sealed. As he spoke, I noticed Gregory's eyes flickering toward the door, as though expecting someone to burst in and declare him victorious. Clara, meanwhile, sat perfectly still, every inch of her body radiating the poise of someone rehearsing triumph. But me, I sat quietly, hands folded, heart steady. The tremor in my fingers was not weakness, it was anticipation. I was not here to surrender. I was here to bear witness to the truth my husband had left behind and to defend it if I must. The reading had only just begun, yet already I could feel the tension in the air thickening. Every word, every glance, every breath mattered. And as I sat there in my cardigan of blue with Sophie's whisper still alive inside me, I knew one thing with certainty: they thought this would be the day they triumphed. But they were wrong. This was the day the truth would begin to surface. Mr. Lawson lifted the first page from the neat stack and adjusted his glasses. The air in that walnut-paneled room grew so still I could hear the faint ticking of the brass clock on the wall. I folded my hands tightly on my lap and tried to quiet the pounding in my chest. Sophie leaned slightly forward, her breath uneven, waiting for words that could alter everything. Gregory leaned back lazily, his arms stretched across the chair like a king awaiting coronation. Clara rested perfectly poised beside him, her lipstick unshaken, her chin high. Lawson's voice was measured, deliberate. Mr. Callahan's last will and testament stipulates that all assets, real estate, financial holdings, and personal property be divided equally among his legal heirs. Clara blinked, a flash of irritation crossing her face. Gregory straightened, his smile twitching. Equally, he repeated, as if the word itself were offensive. Yes. Lawson confirmed his tone. Calm. Equally. For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Then Gregory broke into laughter. It rang too loudly, too harsh for the solemn space bouncing off the walls until it felt grotesque. Equally, he scoffed, still laughing. Well, I suppose that makes sense if you think she'll be around much longer to enjoy it. He tilted his head toward me with a grin that dripped venom. Let's be honest, she's half dead already. The words landed heavy. Sophie gasped softly behind me, her small hand clutching my shoulder. Clara allowed herself a smirk, as though pleased Gregory had dared to say aloud what she only thought. I kept my gaze fixed on the polished wood grain of the table, but inside, I felt something shift. It wasn't just pain, it was a quiet, burning clarity. Lawson set the page down and steepled his fingers. "Mr. Mitchell," he said slowly, "perhaps you should reconsider your tone." Gregory waved him off, still chuckling. "Come on, Harold. Everyone here knows the truth. She can't even hold a pen without trembling. You think she'll outlast any of us?" My hands did tremble, yes, but they were steady enough to hold truth. I lifted my chin, my eyes meeting his. "I've lived longer than you think, Gregory, and I've listened longer than you realize." For the first time that morning, his laughter faltered. Lawson reached for another document, his composure unwavering. There's an additional clause which Mr. Callahan himself insisted be included, a no contest clause. Clara's head tilted sharply. "Explain." "It means Lawson said that any heir who contests this will or seeks to undermine it forfeits their entire inheritance. They would receive nothing." Gregory barked out another laugh, though this one was thinner, less sure. "And how do you prove someone's undermining? That's just legal fluff." Lawson looked directly at him. "Proof exists. That's the point." The air in the room shifted heavy with something unseen. Clara's smile wavered. Gregory leaned forward, frowning now. "What proof?" Lawson opened a leather-bound folder, sliding a small recording device onto the table. The click of it touching the wood echoed like a gunshot. Several weeks ago, Lawson began. Mr. Callahan suspected tension regarding his estate. He took steps. What you are about to hear is one of them. He pressed a button. From the speaker came Gregory's voice, clear, mocking, undeniable. "Once she's gone, it's all mine. I don't care what paper says. She's half dead already." The same words he had just uttered, only colder, caught on tape in another time. The sound filled the room, chilling me to the bone. Sophie's hand gripped my shoulder tighter. I could feel her shaking. Gregory's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. No sound came. His laugh, once so loud, was now strangled in his throat. Clara leaned away from him ever so slightly, her eyes narrowing as though she were calculating new equations in her mind. Lawson let the silence stretch, then spoke quietly. "This recording was made in the presence of multiple witnesses. Your words, Mr. Mitchell. Your intent undeniable. By the terms of the no contest clause, any challenge from you will nullify your share entirely." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gregory's lips twitched. That's not fair. That could be taken out of context." Context? Lawson's voice sharpened for the first time. "You repeated the same words not 5 minutes ago, right here before us all." Gregory's eyes darted, searching for escape. He looked at Clara for rescue, but she folded her arms, cool and distant now. Her alliance was not loyalty, it was convenience. And convenience shifts quickly. I watched him struggle, his arrogance unraveling in slow motion. This was the son I had raised, greedy, careless, blind to consequence. And this was the reckoning he had written with his own tongue. Inside me there was no triumph, only a weary ache. Still, I sat taller, my cardigan smoothing across my lap. Sophie whispered near my ear, "He can't hurt you now, Grandma." My heart softened at her words, but I kept my eyes on Gregory. "Your laughter," I told him quietly, "will not bury me. It only buried you." His face twisted rage, mixing with humiliation. Yet he stayed silent, choking on words that would only dig his grave deeper. Lawson leaned back, folding his hands again. "Shall we proceed with the rest of the reading?" No one answered. Clara smoothed her skirt, refusing to meet Gregory's eye. Sophie kept her hand on my shoulder, trembling but strong. And Gregory. For once in his life, he had nothing left to say. I had waited long enough. For years, I let silence wrap around me like an old shawl, heavy and protective. But that day in Lawson's office, I felt the threads unravel. My hands no longer trembled out of weakness. They trembled because they carried weight, truth, bound in paper and ink. From the worn leather satchel at my feet, I drew the first folder and laid it on the polished table. The sound of its spine hitting the wood echoed louder than Gregory's laughter ever had. This, I said evenly, is the incorporation document of Callahan and Mitchell dated 37 years ago. My signature rests beside my late husband's. Without it, the company would never have been registered. Lawson took the folder, carefully adjusting his glasses as he examined the seal. "Authentic," he murmured. He passed it back into the center of the table, letting everyone see. Gregory leaned forward, his face a storm of disbelief. "That can't be right. She was a housewife," I met his glare steadily. "I was more than that. I was his partner. Every contract he drafted, I typed. Every investor he persuaded, I entertained in our home. When he couldn't meet the bank's collateral, I placed the family farm in trust. Do you think success grows without roots?" Clara's voice cut through like glass. "She's fabricating all this. Probably dug up old stationery, forged her name, paid off some notary." Her eyes flickered nervously toward Lawson. "None of it holds in court." Lawson's brows arched. "Mrs. Mitchell, need I remind you of the no contest clause? To accuse without foundation is to risk forfeiting everything. The clause was written exactly for situations like this." Clara bit her lip, her cheeks tightening, but she said nothing more. I placed the second file onto the table. My hand was steadier now. "These are bank statements notarized showing joint accounts. Funds withdrawn for the company's seed capital bear both our names." Sophie leaned closer from behind her breath, warm on my shoulder. "Grandma," she whispered, "they can't deny this." I gave her a slight nod, my throat tight. Lawson opened the second file, scanning. "Verified," he said. "The bank's seals and signatures are intact. Mrs. Callahan's financial involvement is irrefutable." Gregory shifted, tugging at his collar. "So what if she gave money? Dad built the empire, not her." His voice cracked under the weight of his own insistence. I let him speak, then laid the third folder down with deliberate care. "This is a handwriting analysis conducted by a certified examiner. It confirms that the notes in the earliest company ledgers belong to me. Not to your father, not to some secretary me." The folder sat between us like a stone. Gregory reached for it, but his hand shook so badly the papers slipped. He tried again, but the pen in his grasp rattled against the table, betraying him. Lawson cleared his throat. "For the record, I commissioned this analysis at Mrs. Callahan's request. The examiner is court-approved. His testimony would be admissible." Gregory's face blanched. You helped her." "No," Lawson corrected calmly. "I safeguarded the truth." Clara slammed her palm on the table. "Enough of this parade, she's manipulating you." She waited until now, when emotions are high, to pull out her little collection of dusty papers. I folded my hands, looking at her without flinching. "No, Clara. I waited until now because you would have torn them apart any sooner. But here, with the will in place, with the claws binding you, your claws are clipped." Her eyes flashed with fury, but she remained silent. Gregory's breathing grew ragged. He fumbled with his pen, trying to scribble something onto the margin of his folder, but the ink skidded in broken lines. His hand wouldn't obey. Gregory Lawson said firmly, "You may wish to stop." Any attempt to sign contradictory claims now would be viewed as contesting the will. And as I have already stated, the clause leaves you with nothing if you proceed. Gregory froze the pen dangling from his fingers. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Inside me, grief and vindication wrestled. This was my son, my blood. I never wished him destroyed, only humbled enough to see the truth he had ignored. But his eyes darted wildly, not at me, not at Clara, but at the pile of papers that chained him to consequences. I spoke softly, though each word carried steel. "You laughed at me, Gregory. You told the world I was half dead, yet it seems you are the one paralyzed now, not by age, not by illness, but by fear of the truth you cannot erase." His mouth opened, then closed. The pen slipped from his grip, rolling across the table until it tapped the edge and dropped to the floor. The sound lingered in the silence. Sophie's hand slid into mine, squeezing tight. "Grandma," she whispered, "they can't win anymore." I squeezed back steady this time. "No child, Not when the pages have turned. The stack of documents lay before us undeniable. And with each page, I felt the weight shift not onto me, but off of me. It pressed instead onto Gregory, onto Clara, onto the choices they had made. For once, it was not my voice against theirs. It was the record of a lifetime, preserved in ink, in signatures, in the careful lines of my own handwriting. And in that quiet office, those pages spoke louder than either of them ever could. The silence after the last folder closed was thick enough to suffocate. No one moved, no one breathed too loudly. Then Lawson, calm as ever, folded his hands and leaned forward. "There is one more matter we must address," he said, his voice slow, deliberate. His eyes rested on Gregory and Clara. "This is not only a dispute over inheritance. Certain behaviors described, documented, and even witnessed may rise to the level of elder abuse under state law." The words cracked through the room like lightning. Clara jerked upright. "Elder abuse? No, we never. This is ridiculous. We never harmed her." Her voice pitched high, desperate, the polish of her usual control flaking off. Lawson adjusted his glasses, unbothered. "Mrs. Mitchell, you may not realize that abuse includes more than physical harm. It includes coercion, intimidation, exploitation, and the unlawful appropriation of personal property. When household items are taken without consent, when financial accounts are restricted, when demeaning language is used repeatedly, that is abuse." Gregory's forehead beaded with sweat. He shifted in his chair as if the leather itself had turned to fire beneath him. That's not what happened. We were only organizing, keeping things in order. I finally spoke, my voice steady, though my chest trembled. "Organizing, is that what you call it when you slapped labels on my furniture? Dad's chair? Clara's cabinet? Donate? When you laughed in my face and told me I was half dead already? When you locked me out of my own accounts?" Gregory flinched as though the words themselves struck him. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Clara clutched her handbag, her knuckles white. "We were holding on to those things for safekeeping." "She exaggerates. She forgets details. Old people do." The condescension in her tone sliced deeper than I expected. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay upright. "No, Clara, my memory is intact. I remember every word, every smirk, every time you closed a door in my face, as though I were an intruder in my own house." Lawson's gaze hardened. "I have depositions from 2 household staff corroborating Mrs. Callahan's account. They confirm her property was marked, moved, and withheld without her consent. They also confirm repeated verbal degradation." Gregory's face drained of color. He shifted again, tugging at his tie. In that moment, I saw a flash of him years ago, proud, brash, mocking me in the kitchen as he pasted stickers on heirlooms. The memory struck me with bitter clarity, the sound of the tape, peeling the laughter that followed. Lawson's voice pressed on. "Verbal abuse alone, particularly when paired with financial exploitation, may suffice for criminal charges. If pursued, the penalties include restitution fines and possible incarceration." Sophie gasped, then burst into sobs. Her chair screeched as she rose, tears running down her face. "Stop it, please, stop." She pressed her palms to her eyes. "Why are you doing this? He's my dad. She's my mom. Why would you hurt Grandma like that?" Her pain pierced me deeper than Gregory's insults ever had. I reached out, pulling her trembling frame into my arms. She pressed her face against my shoulder, crying harder. My cardigan dampened with her tears. I stroked her hair gently. "It's not your fault, Sophie. You see the truth now, that's enough. You don't have to carry their choices." She shook her head violently. "I can't stand it. I can't stand hearing it out loud. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't think it was this cruel." Clara rose halfway from her chair, reaching toward her daughter, her voice sharp with panic. "Sophie, sit down. Don't let her turn you against us. We did everything for this family. Everything." But Sophie pulled away, her hands balled into fists. Her sobs became words, raw and trembling. "You didn't do it for us, you did it for yourself." The room froze. Clara's face crumpled, her carefully drawn eyeliner smudging as she blinked hard. She lowered herself back into the chair, staring blankly at the polished floor. Gregory hunched forward, sweat dripping onto his papers. He pressed both hands against his forehead, rocking slightly. "I didn't mean," his voice cracked. "I didn't mean it like that." Lawson's tone stayed firm, even merciless. "Intent does not erase consequence, Mr. Mitchell. Elder abuse is defined by action, not excuse." I sat straighter, holding Sophie close. For years I had borne their disdain in silence, convincing myself that patience was strength. But here, with Sophie weeping against me, I understood that strength was speaking the truth when silence only protected cruelty. "Gregory," I said quietly, "you can pretend this was about order, about efficiency, about inheritance. But deep down, you know what it was. It was power. You wanted me erased before I was even gone." His shoulders sagged. The fight drained from him, leaving only a man cornered by his own reflection. Sophie lifted her head, eyes red and swollen. "Grandma." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have defended you sooner." I kissed her damp forehead. "You did tonight, and that matters more than you know." Lawson gathered the files neatly, his eyes scanning the broken family before him. "This meeting is adjourned for today, but be advised formal proceedings may follow. If so, charges of elder abuse will not be easily dismissed." No one argued. The room held only the sound of Sophie's lingering sobs and Gregory's ragged breathing. I tightened my arm around my granddaughter. For the first time in years, I felt not diminished, but restored. Their cruelty had been dragged into the light, and though it broke Sophie's heart, it also freed her from their deception. And as I looked at my son, his sweat-stained collar clinging to his neck, I saw not power, not triumph, but the small, shame-filled boy he had once been, now trapped by the man he had chosen to become. Gregory slumped forward, elbows on his knees, his head buried in his hands. His voice rasped, barely more than a whisper, yet it carried across the silent room. "Mom, I only wanted to keep a piece of it. I never meant to take everything. I didn't think." His words broke off, strangled by shame. I kept my gaze fixed on him, steady, unblinking. "No, Gregory, you didn't want a piece. You wanted it all, and you were willing to strip me of dignity to get it." He lifted his face, red and drawn. His lips trembled as if searching for a defense that would not come. I thought you'd be gone soon. Everyone kept saying you were frail. I wanted to secure things before they slipped away. Secure them for who I asked, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through his excuses. For me or for yourself. His eyes darted, unable to hold mine. His silence was louder than any confession. I leaned closer, my words deliberate. "The truth is simple, Gregory. I kept my life in order, my accounts balanced, my documents signed. Nothing was slipping away except your patience. You could not wait for me to breathe my last before you claimed what you thought was yours." Clara's mascara streaked as she sat slack in her chair. Her lipstick smeared her expression hollow. For once she had no words, no sharp remarks. Her silence only deepened the weight pressing down on her husband. Gregory shook his head violently. "I didn't hate you, Mom. I was tired of waiting. You worked hard all those years, and I thought I was entitled. I thought you'd understand." Understand. My chest tightened, but I refused to let my voice break. Understand that my own son saw me as an obstacle. Understand that instead of cherishing what little time we had, you measured it in assets, furniture, bank accounts. Gregory, I am your mother, not a ledger. He swallowed hard, his hands gripping each other until his knuckles whitened. I didn't mean for it to turn cruel. The jokes, the labels, it got out of hand, but it was never supposed to be. It was exactly what it became. I cut in. My voice rose slightly, no longer gentle. You laughed while you erased me. You mocked me because it was easier than admitting you were wrong. You made me smaller, Gregory, so you could feel bigger." For a moment his face softened boyish, almost like the child who once clung to my apron strings when storms rattled the windows. That memory clashed painfully against the man before me, broken by greed. He whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." I let the silence linger, heavy but necessary. Then I said, "You don't fix betrayal with excuses. You face it with truth. And the truth is not yours to twist or bury. The truth has never belonged to the one who despises it." His eyes widened and his lips quivered. My words landed harder than any raised hand could. Sophie still curled near me, wiped her damp cheeks, and looked at her father with an expression I had never seen before. Disbelief, sorrow, but also clarity. "Dad, how could you? Grandma gave you everything already, her time, her love, her trust, and you threw it back like it was worthless." Gregory looked at her as if struck. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He lowered his gaze, unable to bear his daughter's disappointment. Clara suddenly stirred her voice, trembling. "We only wanted to secure the future. Don't twist it like we were monsters. We thought we were protecting what was ours." I turned to her, my words firm yet steady. "Yours, Clara. Nothing was yours to take. Not my home, not my savings, not even the air of superiority you wore like a crown. You married my son, but that did not make you heir to my life." Her shoulders sagged. She sank deeper into the chair, her hands trembling against her lap. The smudged red of her lips no longer looked powerful, only desperate, cracked. Gregory's chest heaved. His eyes glistened, but the tears would not fall. "I didn't think it would come to this," he murmured, voice hoarse. "I thought you'd forgive me. You always forgave me." The words sliced into me because they were true. I had forgiven him too many times. When he skipped classes, when he squandered chances, when he let bitterness guide his choices. Each time I told myself he was still learning. But tonight proved he had not been learning, he had been taking. "I forgave you because I believed in you," I said quietly. "But forgiveness is not infinite, Gregory. It loses meaning when the one forgiven never changes. Tonight you face not only me, but yourself, and I cannot shield you from that." The room fell into an aching silence. Gregory stared at the table, his breath ragged. Clara sat hollow-eyed, her painted armor gone. Sophie clutched my hand, her warmth anchoring me. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time, I did not bend beneath their weight. I stood taller in spirit, not because I won a battle, but because I finally refused to lose myself. Gregory finally whispered, "Broken. I don't deserve anything." I met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "At last, you speak the truth." The words hung in the air, a verdict no gavel could deliver more cleanly. The air in Harold's office still carried the echo of every word spoken. Papers lay scattered on the polished table, pens abandoned the heavy silence thicker than velvet. Gregory sat slumped. Clara's face was streaked with ruined makeup, and Harold quietly stacked the documents as though to shield them from the wreckage of emotions. I felt Sophie's small hand slip from mine, and for a moment I feared she would retreat with her parents. But instead she took a trembling step forward, then another, until she turned and flung her arms tightly around me. Her body shook against mine, her cheek pressed against my shoulder. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for them. I'm sorry for everything Dad and Mom did. I know now. You're the root, the beginning. Without you, none of us would be here." My throat tightened, words struggling to surface. I had imagined many endings to this night. Anger, despair, emptiness. But never this. My granddaughter holding me with such clarity, her young voice carrying more truth than all the legal statements combined. I wrapped my arms around her, stroking her hair gently. Her sobs soaked into my blouse, but I did not mind. For once, The tears felt cleansing, not shattering. I wanted to tell her everything, that I never blamed her, that she was never at fault, that I knew the cruelty came from those above her, not within her. Yet all that left my lips was a soft exhale, a quiet nod, my eyes meeting hers when she finally pulled back. There was sorrow there, but also a release, a quiet relief that someone had seen through the fog. Her eyes, red from crying, burned with a resolve far beyond her years. I won't let them take away who you are anymore. I don't care if it's my parents. What they did was wrong. You're my grandmother, and you deserve more than the way they treated you. Her words pierced deeper than accusations ever could, because they carried love and choice. She wasn't simply defending me out of pity. She was reclaiming her own voice. Clara stirred, then a faint gasp escaping her lips. Her hands clutched her purse on her lap as if it could anchor her. She stared at Sophie, her daughter, her reflection of youth, yet the girl she once guided now stood on the other side. For one fleeting second, I saw something flicker in Clara's eyes, not anger, not disdain, but regret. Genuine, raw regret. It passed like a shadow, but I caught it. She looked at her daughter, and the shimmer of hasty tears blurred the thick lines of mascara. Her mouth parted as if to say something, to reach across the chasm she herself had dug. But she said nothing, and in that silence everything collapsed. Gregory rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. "This isn't how it was supposed to go." His voice cracked hoarse, but no one responded. Sophie didn't even glance at him. Instead, she squeezed my hand tighter. "Grandma, please don't ever think you're alone again. I see you. I promise I see you." The words folded around me like a blanket I had long been denied. For years, I had walked past my family's indifference, swallowed their mockery, and buried my disappointment under forced smiles. Tonight, in the face of legal clauses and shattered masks, Sophie gave me back something greater than property. She gave me recognition. I nodded again, still unable to speak my emotions, a fragile balance of sorrow and gratitude. The truth weighed heavy, but at least it was seen, no longer hidden. Clara shifted in her seat, her shoulders sagging. She finally managed to murmur, "Sophie." Her voice cracked, dry and unfamiliar. There was a tremor of longing in it, but it was faint, already fading. Sophie turned her head slightly, her face still pressed against my shoulder. For the first time, she did not leap at her mother's voice, did not seek comfort there. She remained still, rooted in me. That quiet refusal struck Clara harder than any insult. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "I didn't mean..." But the sentence dissolved, incomplete, powerless. I lifted my eyes and caught hers. For an instant, she looked human, stripped of pride, stripped of polish, only a woman staring at the daughter she could no longer control. That flash of regret might have grown into something had it come years earlier. But now, when everything lay bare, it was too late. Harold cleared his throat softly, perhaps to break the tension. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, addressing me gently, "you don't have to decide anything further tonight. The documents are in place. What matters is that the record speaks truth." I nodded, acknowledging his words, but my heart was focused elsewhere. Sophie leaned into me, clutching me as if she feared I might vanish. "Grandma," she whispered again, quieter this time, "they'll hate me for choosing you, but I don't care." I tilted her chin up so she would meet my eyes. "Sophie, listen to me. Choosing truth is not betrayal. It is the only path that keeps you whole. They may resent it now, but one day they will see." Her lower lip trembled, but she nodded, holding my gaze. "Then I'll be whole. With you." I kissed her forehead, feeling the dampness of her tears, and in that moment I felt the years of humiliation lose their grip. Clara looked on, silent, frozen in her chair. That glimmer of regret flickered again, weaker this time, like a candle nearly snuffed out. She had the chance to bridge the distance to reach her daughter with honesty, but pride sealed her lips, and so the chance passed, swallowed by the weight of her silence. The room settled into a fragile stillness. Gregory remained bowed, Clara broken, and Harold's eyes softened behind his spectacles. But at the center of it all was Sophie, her arms around me, her choice, clear her future, no longer theirs to dictate. I felt both sorrow and release. Sorrow for the family that had unraveled, release because at least one branch chose to grow toward the light. And in Sophie's embrace, I realized something profound. Blood may bind us, but it is truth that roots us. The legal proceedings ended more swiftly than anyone had expected. Harold's verdict was clear. Gregory was stripped of any claim to my estate. The no contest clause that he thought would silence me instead sealed his downfall. Every signature, every sneer he once wielded with arrogance now came back to choke him. Weeks later, the consequences began to unfold with merciless precision. Notices piled at his doorstep, letters marked urgent, stamped in red. I knew enough to understand creditors had come calling, and debts that once hid beneath bravado now demanded payment. I saw him one late afternoon, not inside a courtroom or across Harold's desk, but outside his own house. I had been walking slowly down the block, Sophie by my side, when my gaze caught the figure slumped on the front steps. Gregory sat hunched forward, his shirt wrinkled collar, bent sleeves rolled unevenly. His face, once flushed with pride, looked gaunt and hollow, a gray shadow under his eyes. He held a cigarette between his trembling fingers, striking the lighter again and again, but the flame refused him. Each failed spark mirrored the collapse of his will. The street was quiet except for the low murmur of neighbors gathered nearby. Two women whispered by the hedge, their voices barely concealed. "Is that Gregory?" "Yes," the other replied, shaking her head. "The same man who laughed at his own mother. Look at him now. It's judgment." "Serves him right," came the hushed answer. "He mocked the very hands that raised him. Now even the smoke won't come." I heard every word, and so did he. His shoulders stiffened, but he never looked their way. Instead, he stared at the unlit cigarette jaw, tightening, a man who once controlled boardrooms, now powerless against a small piece of paper and tobacco. For a moment, I felt a wave of something unexpected, not triumph, not vengeance, but a deep ache. He was still my son. No matter how cruel he had been, no matter the humiliation he'd piled upon me, I remembered the boy he once was. I remembered patching scraped knees, saving coins to buy his school shoes, watching him march across a graduation stage while my heart swelled. How had that boy turned into this broken man? Sophie squeezed my hand, sensing my silence. She looked at me, then at him, her eyes wide with both pity and anger. "Grandma," she whispered, "he deserves this. You can't forget what he did." I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on Gregory. "I don't forget," I murmured. "But forgetting and mourning are not the same." As if feeling our gaze, Gregory finally looked up. Our eyes met across the distance. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then with a slow shake of his head, he lowered his face into his hands. The creditors arrived soon after, 3 men in dark jackets, stepping out of a car holding folders and clipboards. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. The mere presence of their paperwork carried the weight of punishment. I could see Gregory's body slump further as they approached, their voices curt and official. One of them knocked on the door. Another scanned the yard. The word repossession floated in the air like a curse. Sophie tugged my arm. "Let's go, Grandma. We don't need to watch." But I couldn't move. My legs rooted to the pavement. I stood a witness to the unraveling of the man who once called me burden. Gregory's hands shook harder. He finally managed to light the cigarette, but the puff he drew seemed hollow, pointless. Smoke curled weakly upward, then dissipated into nothing much like the empire he had imagined would always be his. A neighbor's voice rose again, sharper this time. He thought he was untouchable. Now look at him. No house soon, no inheritance, nothing. Another replied with grim satisfaction, "It's God's punishment." I turned slightly, my heart heavy. There was no satisfaction in their words for me. The world was already cruel enough. Their judgment only deepened the pit he had dug. Gregory did not speak to me. Not then, not later. But in that brief exchange of glances, I saw it, the recognition that he had mocked the wrong person, dismissed the wrong truth, underestimated the very woman who had given him life. As Sophie and I walked away, I felt her glance back again and again. "Do you think he'll ever change?" she asked softly. I inhaled my chest, rising with the weight of decades. "I don't know," I admitted. "Sometimes people lose everything and find their soul. Other times they lose everything and nothing remains." She leaned against me as we continued down the sidewalk. Behind us, Gregory sat slumped creditors, circling neighbors, whispering the smoke from his trembling hand, curling upward like the ghost of all his arrogance. And in that moment, I understood something sharper than victory. Losing wealth was nothing compared to losing respect, losing dignity, losing the love of a child who once saw you as invincible. That was the punishment he could not escape. For me, there was no glee in watching him unravel. Only a cold reminder that cruelty always circles back, that a man who forgets the roots of his life will one day find himself with nothing but ashes in his hands. That day, Gregory lost more than inheritance. He lost his place in the story of our family. And though I walked away with Sophie's hand firmly in mine, the image of him sitting broken on that step will remain with me forever. The final picture of a son who once mocked his mother, now mocked by fate itself. After Gregory's ruin became the talk of the neighborhood, Clara's mask began to crack. For years she had stood behind him, her chin high, her lips painted red like a shield. She once carried herself with the certainty that money and influence would always protect her. But without Gregory's inheritance, without his arrogant confidence propping her up, she was suddenly exposed. I heard from Sophie first. She came to me one evening, worry etched on her face. "Grandma?" She whispered Mom. She sold her emerald earrings today, the ones she never let anyone touch. I closed my eyes. Those earrings had been her favorite symbol of superiority, a pair she flaunted at family dinners, tilting her head so the green stones caught the light. To part with them meant desperation. Days later, I saw Clara myself. She arrived at the pawn shop in town, slipping inside quickly, but not quickly enough to escape notice. Through the glass, I watched her unclasp the necklace I remembered from birthdays and weddings. The same necklace she once mocked me for not affording. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the counter, her lips pressed into a thin line. The man behind the counter examined the jewels with cold efficiency. He weighed them, jotted down numbers, and slid the offer across. Clara's face tightened. She wanted to argue, her pride flickered for just a second, but then she signed. Money exchanged hands, and she walked out, clutching cash, her eyes darting around as if every passerby carried judgment. That night, I could not sleep. I thought of all the words she had once hurled at me, outdated, irrelevant burden. Those words now circled back to her, a chorus she could not silence. I did not need anyone to tell me how much she was unraveling. The signs were everywhere. Her laughter, once sharp and showy, vanished. Her carefully painted face now looked smudged by noon, as if she no longer cared to reapply. And then came the moment that seared itself into my memory. I had gone to bring Sophie home after school. The house was strangely quiet. Sophie tiptoed upstairs, and that's when we both saw her. Clara sat before her vanity mirror. The room smelled faintly of stale perfume, the kind she used to spray too generously. Her lipstick had faded into uneven streaks. Her mascara ran in faint shadows under her eyes. She was staring straight into the mirror, but did not seem to see herself. Her hands rested limply on the tabletop, the jewelry box beside her, nearly empty. Mom Sophie's voice cracked. Clara blinked as if waking from a trance. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes were vacant, the sparkle of manipulation gone. She whispered hoarsely, "I never thought it would end like this." Sophie froze, tears welling. I stepped forward, my voice steadier than I felt. "Clara," I said quietly, "life has a way of turning words into mirrors." Her mouth quivered. For a fleeting instant, I thought she might lash out spit venom as she always did. But no, she lowered her gaze. "Do you think I deserve this?" she asked, almost childlike. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. "Deserve is a dangerous word," I replied, "but every action leaves a mark, and sometimes when we wound others, that wound finds its way back." Her shoulders sagged. She lifted her face toward the mirror again, as if the reflection itself was delivering a verdict. The glamorous woman she once adored, seeing, was gone. What remained was someone hollow, fragile. Sophie whispered, "Mom, please stop. You're scaring me." Clara reached for her daughter's hand, but Sophie stepped back instinctively. The rejection was small, but it cut deeper than any insult she'd ever thrown at me. Clara's lips trembled, and then with a sudden sob, she covered her face. I stood in silence, my heart a mixture of sorrow and inevitability. This was not victory. It was the sight of a woman undone by her own choices. Later that week, neighbors spoke in hushed tones again, but this time about Clara. "She sold her bracelet," one said, "the diamond one." Another added, "I saw her at the market bargaining over pennies." The woman who once prided herself on control now stumbled under invisible weight. Her sharp remarks, her clever manipulations, all dissolved. And though no judge declared her guilty, she lived beneath the harshest sentence, her own reflection. I watched all this unfold, and I could not help but remember her words to me at the lawyer's office, how she had pressed me to sign, her voice smooth and insistent, her lipstick flawless then. That same mouth now whispered apologies into empty rooms. One evening I found her alone in the garden. She sat on a stone bench, clutching a faded scarf. Her eyes lifted to mine, raw and unguarded. "I thought I was smarter than you," she said bitterly. "I thought I could win." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply answered, "Sometimes winning is losing, Clara. You held everything but the truth, and the truth always wins." Her tears fell silently. She bowed her head, and for the first time she had nothing left to argue. That night, as I held Sophie's hand walking back home, I felt the weight of it all. Gregory had lost his power. Clara had lost her pride. And I, though battered by betrayal, stood with something neither of them could reclaim: dignity. Clara's collapse was not a scene of drama for others to mock. It was quieter, sadder. The slow erosion of a woman who built her worth on wealth and cunning, only to find herself staring into a mirror where neither could save her. The house in Sacramento had always felt like someone else's castle, spacious, polished, intimidating in its silence. Gregory and Clara loved to boast about its size, the marble floors, the grand staircase. But to me, it never held warmth. It was a place of display, not of love. After everything unraveled, I stood in the foyer one last time. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching dust motes in the air. The echo of my footsteps seemed louder than ever. I placed my palm against the cool wall, and I whispered almost to myself, "This house was never mine." When the papers were signed, I felt no grief. Instead, a weight lifted. Sacramento had been full of betrayal, of echoes, of arguments, of shadows that stretched too long. I needed a different place, one where memory did not sting but healed. That's why I chose Santa Barbara. The first morning I arrived, the ocean greeted me with its steady voice. Waves crashed against the shore, salt carried on the breeze. I closed my eyes and inhaled. The air here was softer, lighter, as if it had been waiting for me. Santa Barbara had always been special. It was where my husband and I once spent long afternoons walking the beach, talking about futures we hadn't yet known would be so fragile. Sophie came with me for the move. She carried boxes into the modest little house I bought, white walls, a small garden, windows that faced the sea. "Grandma," she said, setting a box down with a grin, "this feels like you." I smiled. Not too big, not too small. just enough space for memories and for peace. She nodded, and her eyes lingered on me with a quiet pride. The house itself was nothing like Sacramento's mansion. My new living room was simple, with wooden floors that creaked slightly and curtains that fluttered whenever the breeze came in from the ocean. But it felt alive. It felt like mine. I unpacked slowly. Among the first things I placed was the framed photograph of my husband. His smile, captured on a summer afternoon, had always been my anchor. I set it gently on the windowsill where the morning light would touch it first. Sitting there beside the ocean he loved, I whispered, "We came home." But I did not only move for myself. The betrayal I had lived through had left scars. Yes, but it had also opened my eyes. How many women had been silenced, sidelined, told they were too small to matter? How many were like me, pushed aside by louder voices, stronger hands, and sharper tongues? That thought followed me each day as I walked through town. Santa Barbara had its share of young women working double shifts, struggling through school, juggling children and dreams. I saw them, and in them I saw the girl I used to be. The girl who married young, who was told her worth, was measured by what she could sacrifice. So I made a decision. With the portion of inheritance left in my name, I created a scholarship fund. It was modest compared to the grand charities the wealthy flaunted, but it was real, and it was mine. For women left at the edges, I wrote in the mission statement, "For those whose voices have been quiet too long." The day I signed the documents to establish it, Sophie sat beside me. She held my hand tightly. "Grandma, you're changing lives," she said softly. I shook my head. "I'm only giving back what should have never been withheld. Every woman deserves a chance to stand on her own feet." At night, in my little room, I often sat by the window looking out at the water. The ocean was constant, steady. It carried whispers of my husband's laughter, memories of simpler days. And as I gazed at his photograph, I felt something settle inside me, an acceptance, and even a quiet joy. One evening, Sophie asked, "Do you miss Sacramento?" I laughed gently. "No, darling, I miss people sometimes. I miss the way I wished things could be. But the house, the power, the noise, no. What I have here is better." She leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. "I like it here. I like that you're smiling again." I wrapped my arm around her. For so long, I had carried bitterness like armor. But in that moment, I realized it was safe to lay it down. The scholarship soon received its first applications. Stories poured in. Women leaving broken marriages, girls the first in their families to dream of college mothers, working nights who still wanted to learn. Each application was a reminder that the world was larger than my pain. I read them late into the night, tears staining the pages. Grandma Sophie peeked in one night. "Yes, you're glowing." I chuckled. "That's just the lamp." "No," she insisted. "It's you." Her words stayed with me, because she was right. I had chosen not just survival, but renewal. The sea outside my window rolled endlessly, a reminder that life moved forward, whether we were ready or not. I had been hurt, betrayed, cast aside, but I had chosen not to wither. Instead, I chose Santa Barbara, the sea, the scholarship, the photograph by the window. And every morning when the sun lit my husband's face in that frame, I smiled back, quietly, steadily. Not with triumph, not with revenge, but with peace. It was a quiet afternoon in Santa Barbara, the kind where the sea seemed to hum instead of roar. The air carried a gentleness, as if even the wind knew it should not disturb my thoughts. I was at the kitchen table reading through a stack of letters from women who had applied for the scholarship. Their stories filled me with both sorrow and strength. Each one reminded me of why I had chosen this path. The door opened without a knock, followed by light footsteps. Only Sophie ever entered this way. Grandma. She called softly, "I have something for you." I looked up and she stood there holding a folded piece of paper, edges worn as if she had carried it close to her for some time. Her cheeks were pink from the sea breeze, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of shyness and pride. "What is it, darling?" I asked, pushing the papers aside. She walked over and carefully laid it in front of me. It was a drawing, simple, done with colored pencils. A tree stretched across the page. Its roots dug deep and wide, thick and steady. Its trunk stood firm while the branches arched upward, full of leaves that spread into a sheltering canopy. Beneath the tree, two smaller figures sat in the shade safe. At the bottom, in letters crooked and uneven, she had written, "Grandma, you are the root." My throat tightened. For a moment, I could not speak. I traced the lines with my finger, feeling the grooves of her pencil. Sophie's voice wavered. "I wanted you to have this. I know things have been messy, but I want you to remember how I see you. Strong, steady, always here even when storms come." I reached out and pulled her into my arms. "Oh, Sophie." My voice cracked. The words caught between gratitude and sorrow. "You see me more clearly than most adults ever did." She hugged me tightly, her small hands pressing into my shoulders. "That's because I don't just look at what people say, Grandma. I look at what they do. And you always stayed." We sat there like that for a while, the drawing still between us. Finally, I lifted it carefully and set it upright on the table. The tree seemed to glow in the afternoon light as if it was alive, swaying slightly in an unseen breeze. My eyes drifted to the leather-bound notebook beside it, my updated will pages marked with neat signatures and witnesses' stamps. I reached for it, slowly running my hand across its cover. Then, with a steady breath, I closed it. The sound of the cover shutting was soft, final, yet strangely freeing. I looked at Sophie. She was watching me closely, as if searching for something on my face. "Grandma," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "It's done, Sophie. All of it. Nothing more needs to be said." Her shoulders eased. "So, it's over." "Yes." I folded my hands, letting them rest gently on the table. Justice has its own language. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It settles like the tide, quiet, steady, undeniable. Outside, the waves rolled in again as if agreeing with me. I thought of Gregory, hunched on his steps, unable to light his cigarette. I thought of Clara staring into a mirror where her painted face could no longer hide her hollow eyes. And I thought of myself not in victory, not in revenge, but in clarity. Their downfall was not my triumph. It was simply the truth finding its way out like roots breaking through the earth. Sophie touched the drawing again. "Do you like it? Like it?" I chuckled softly, though tears brimmed at the corners of my eyes. "This is the finest gift I have ever been given. Better than jewels, better than houses, better than money. Because it tells me I did not live in vain. It tells me that you understand." She grinned, shy and earnest. I thought, maybe someday you can hang it next to Grandpa's picture. I nodded slowly. Yes, that's exactly where it belongs. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was full like a song with no need for lyrics. I reached over, closing the notebook of my will once more, and placed Sophie's drawing on top of it. Past and future resting together. The room glowed with a soft light, and in that glow I felt the sharp edges of my pain smooth into something gentler. Not gone, but transformed. I had been betrayed, humiliated, discarded. Yet here I was still breathing, still smiling, still rooted. And from me, Sophie would grow stronger, freer. That thought alone made every tear I had shed worth it. She leaned against me, and together we watched the ocean through the window. No words, no explanations, no apologies were needed anymore. The world outside kept moving, but inside this little house time stilled, just long enough to savor the quiet after everything. I pressed a kiss to Sophie's hair. "Remember, darling, roots don't ask for recognition. They just hold everything together." She nodded against my shoulder. "And you do it better than anyone." That night, when the lamps were turned off and the drawing rested beside my husband's photograph, I sat alone for a few minutes longer. My eyes drifted between the picture frame and Sophie's colors. One memory, one promise. No grandeur, no applause. Only stillness, only justice. And in that stillness, my heart found peace. The story, my story, no longer needed words. It simply was,